Hello, pumpkins. Here we go once again. We are going to have a small discussion, I guess brief discussion of extra practice page 140 of Unit 3, Lesson 5, Present Tense. Okay? And before we get started, I hope that you guys are all doing well and that your parents and your relatives are doing well also. Okay. That being said, let's get started. Before we go into the extra practice page, we are going to review the topic per se. We are going to talk about the present tense because we know that when we're talking about the present tense, there are rules that we have to follow to form the present tense. And there are three rules that you have to memorize and you have to know them by heart. And don't forget that when we're talking about the present tense, we have to keep an eye on the subject at all times, okay? So we'll discuss the rules briefly and then we'll move on to more details about this. Okay, so rule number one talks about to most verbs add s. Okay, so as it says here, most verbs add s, and then we have some examples here on the right side. Get, gets, play, plays, jump, and jumps. And this is what we're going to do to most. Now, there's a lot of emphasis on this word right here. Okay, so you got to keep an eye on here because it talks about most verbs. We're not going to do this to all of them. We're just going to do to most verbs. Now, the second rule that we are going to be working with is verbs ending in s, ch, sh, x, and z. Now, if the verb ends with, if it has those endings, then you're going to add es at the end, as we see here. Okay? We have pass, goes to passes. If you look at the underlined s here, it says this is what the ending is. Okay? The ending is with an s, we add es. Mix ends with x, we add es. Teach ends with ch, we add es. And again, don't forget that we're going to see changes in the verb if the subject is singular. And we're going to cover that in the next slide, but that's something that I want you guys to remember, okay? So let me get this, let me erase this here and this here so that no, we're not distracted with anything else. Okay, so we see some examples here, punch and punches, fizz, fizzes, fix, fixes, and I underlined the ending of these verbs so that you know why are we adding the es, and it's because they end with s, ch, sh, x, or z, okay? Now, rule number 3, and this is where I need for you to find a piece of paper. You're supposed to have these rules written either in a loosely paper, in your notebook, on a sticky note, and just have them near you so that if you, when we continue or throughout your work, you can have those rules right next to you so that you can use them so that they can help you. Okay, verbs ending with a consonant and y, we are going to change the y to I and add es. And I know that there are some people that are getting confused with this. For some reason, they're confusing consonants with vowels. And like we're in 5th grade, by now you should know the vowels, you should know your consonants. But if you're still struggling with this, you can't tell the difference between one and the other. What I want you to do is I want you to write the alphabet, A, B, C, D. You're going to write out the alphabet. And then I want you to circle the vowels. So you're going to circle A, circle E, you circle I, circle O, and then you circle U. Okay? So those are our vowels. And every other letter that is left in the alphabet, we call consonants. Okay? Those are your consonants. So what I want you to do is if you have a highlighter, or if not, you can just underline the consonants. Go ahead and underline or highlight the consonants. Okay, so that you have that paper. And if you need to, if you forget, if you get to a verb and you have no idea what it is that you have to do, you go to this paper and you look And you know that the circle ones are your vowels, and that the underlined or highlighted letters, those are your consonants, okay? So after you do that, there are two things that I want you to write next to wherever you wrote rule number 3, okay? And I hope that you guys are doing this. The first thing that you're going to notice when you see a verb that ends with Y is that it actually ends with Y. That's the first thing that you're going to notice. You're going to see that quickly, you'll see that it ends with a Y. So I'm trying to, there you go. Okay, so you're going to, immediately, you're going to notice that the verb ends with Y. And once it happens, once that happens, you identify the verb which ends with a Y. I want you to look at the letter before it, okay? So I want you to look at the letter before it. And the letter before the Y in the verb try is R, right? So then if at this point you have no idea, if you are still confused as to whether or not that's a consonant or a vowel, I want you to go to the paper where you wrote the alphabet and check to see if it's circled or if it's highlighted or underlined. And in your paper, letter R should be either highlighted or underlined because it is a consonant, okay? So because this is a consonant, what's going to happen? Well, according to the rules, let me get this out of the way. According to the rules, what's going to happen is that this Y is going to change into an I. Here we go. And then you are going to add ES. So you change the Y to I and add ES, okay? Same thing with empty. You identify that empty ends with a Y, then you look at the letter before it, which is a T. So you know that you have to change the Y to I and add ES. If, for whatever reason, you have a verb, such as play right here. See, play is a verb that ends in Y. But when you look at the letter before it, and you look at the paper, if you're still confused, you're going to realize that the letter A is circled because A is a vowel. So for present tense, verbs ending in vowel Y, you add an S, okay, if the subject is singular. Again, when we're working with the present tense, there is a close relationship between the subject and the present tense. If the subject is singular, the verb changes according to these rules that we're studying now. Rule number 1, rule number 2, and rule number 3. Okay, so I hope that you guys are with me here. And if you get to, for example, you're working with a verb and you have no idea what rule you're supposed to use, do I use number 1, do I use number 2, do I use number 3? Do the process of elimination. Look at the verb. For example, is to play. You're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. I don't know if I have to change it to ES or if add ES or change anything to I and add IES, maybe. Then what you have to do is you go back to the rules and you're like, okay, verbs ending in S, I don't know if I have to use number 1. So let me go to number 2 because number 2 is very specific. So let's see if the verb ends in S, CH, SH, X, or Z. And you look at the verb play and you're like, no, it ends with Y. So I know that I cannot use rule number 2. So I eliminate it. That's why it's called process of elimination, because you eliminate the incorrect answers, the choices that cannot. They're very obvious and you're like, okay, no, I cannot use that one. So then you go to number 3 and then you're like, okay, this one is for verbs ending with a consonant and Y. Oh, wait, maybe I can use number 3. But then you're like, okay, ending in consonant and Y. And I know that Mrs. Villamosa said that I have to look at the letter before the Y. A is a vowel. And this is talking about a consonant. So no, rule number 3 is eliminated as well because it's not play ends with a vowel Y. And rule number 3 specifically says ending with a consonant in Y. So I cannot use number 3 either. So I eliminated rule number 2. I eliminated rule number 3, which means there's only an obvious answer to this one, right? Rule number one is the only one left. So I use rule number one. Okay? Are you guys with me? I hope so. Let's continue. Okay. So it's important for you to remember again that the present tense works with the subject. So if the subject is singular, see right here where it says singular. Let me see if I could do something so that I can get your attention right here. Singular. If the subject, if it's singular, that means one, okay? If the subject is just naming one person, one place, and one thing, if it's just talking about one person, one place, or one thing, then you know that the verb is going to change according to the rules. So the verb changes according to the rules. That's what you have to find out. I'm just going to add S. Do I have to use rule number 2? Do I have to use rule number 3? And that's what you have to do. So singular subject, the verb changes according to the rules. Look at the first, let's look at the example. There's only one. Try. So you see the verb try. You look at your paper where you copied all of your rules, and you immediately notice that it ends with a Y. See, you can see it right there. You identify, you're like, oh, this verb ends with a Y. There you go. So if it ends with a Y, you know that you have a rule in there that talks about verbs ending in Y, but it says consonant Y. It doesn't say vowel Y, it says consonant Y. So you have to go into your paper if you can't tell the difference between consonants and vowels yet. You go to your paper and you check to see, is it circled? Is it a vowel? Or is it a consonant? Okay, so you're going to look at letter R. And in your paper, letter R should be either highlighted or underlined because letter R is a consonant. So yes, try is a verb that ends in consonant and Y. So when a verb ends in consonant and Y, we change the Y to I and add ES. Remember the song? We change the Y to I and add ES. Perfect. Okay. So the verb changed, and here we see that the verb changed because, why do you think this verb changed? Why? I'm going to give you a second. Quick, tell me why. Why is the verb changing? If you said because the subject is girl, and girl is a singular subject, we're just talking about one girl. So if it's a singular subject, the verb changes. Perfect. Okay. Now let's go to plural subjects. What happens, Ms. Villamosa, if the subject is plural? Okay. If the subject is plural, the verb stays in its base form. It's going to stay in its base form. So here we go. Now we're working with plural subjects. And we have two exceptions to this rule. We have I and we have you, right? I, usually it would be just the singular subject, right? And you would also be a singular subject. But when we are working with the present tense, I and you are exceptions. Don't forget that English has many exceptions, and I and you, they're included in this. So I and you are going to be treated as if they were plural subject, okay? So when the subject is plural, the verb stays in its base form. So when you guys are working with the present tense, you have to be able to identify the subject in the sentence, the who or what the sentence is about. Let's look at the example. And we're still using the same example that we used in the previous section. So we have try, and it says, the boys try to eat their lunch quickly. Maybe they went out for, after class, they maybe have 10 minutes, so they have to eat their lunch quickly because they have to start the next class in, let's say, in a few minutes. I'm just making things up. Okay. So you identify that What do you identify? You identify that the subject, boys, is what the sentence is talking about. And you're like, boys. And I know that boys means more than one. We're talking about more than two, right? Two or more. Perdón. Okay, sorry. Okay, so the boys tried. Now, notice that what happens with this verb? What happened here? The verb stayed in its base form, okay? You don't change it. It stays in its base form. You are not going to add anything, add es or I. You're not doing anything to it. It's just going to stay in its base form. So if the subject is plural, the verb stays in its base form. Okay? Are you guys with me? Okay. Let me get rid of this so we can continue to our next slide. And the reason I have to erase it is if I leave it, it'll go to the next slide. We don't want that. Okay, let's continue. If the slide wants to move, then maybe we'll continue. There we go. Okay, so now that we've done a brief review of present tense, we are going to discuss the extra practice, page 140. These are the things that you're going to need. Of course, you're going to need the notebook or the loose leaf paper where you completed the assignment. Okay, and you're going to use a red, blue, or any other color except for black pen. I really want a color that pops out so that when you're correcting your page, your assignment, that it's very obvious to you and you can clearly see, okay, this is something that I need to be careful with because I made a mistake here. So I need to check to see and study a bit further on that, okay? All right. So extra practice, page 140, in the circle section, all you guys had to do was read the sentence and write the present tense verb in the sentences below. So in this case, you pretty much all you had to do was identify the verb, excuse me, and that's all you needed. So in your page, in your notebook, this is what it should look like. You should have for number 1, like, for number 2, go, for number 3, buy, for number 4, goes, for number 5, watches, and for number 6, teaches. Okay, so double check your paper and make any corrections. The good thing about the class being pre-recorded is that you can pause it. You could go to your paper, make the corrections. Be careful with the spelling because that's important as well. You need to double check that you're spelling it exactly how you should be spelling it, okay? So let's go to the next section. Now in the triangle part, according to the directions, it says here that you had to write the correct present tense form of each verb in parentheses. So they gave you a sentence and then they gave you at the end a verb in parentheses in its base form. So you have to write the correct form of the present tense. So for number 7, she blank new cane seats in them. So for number 7, you should have put, and we follow rule number 1 for this one, okay? And the reason why the verb changed is because the subject is singular, she. We're talking about just one person. Number 8, first, she blanked the strips of cane in water. Again, we have in the subject, in the sentence, we identify the subject, and we see that we're talking about she. Again, it's a singular subject, so the verb changes. So we should have soap, as you can see here in the monitor, okay? Number 9, next, she carefully blanked the seat. Again, we're still talking about she, so it's still a singular subject. So that tells you singular subject. The verb changes according to the rule. So we have weave, and we know that we have to follow rule number 1, so we just add an S. So then it changes to next, she carefully weaves the seat. Number 10, then the cane blanked slowly, and we have the verb dry. So when we look at the verb dry, first we identify that we're talking about just cane, and that you know that if you have a singular subject, the verb is going to change according to the rules. So you go to the rules and you identify that, which rule are you going to use for dry? Notice that the verb dry ends with a Y. And if you look at the letter before the Y, you're going to realize that letter R is a consonant. So rule number 3 should apply for this one. That's why we changed the Y to I and add ES, because we're following rule number 3. For number 11, the new seat blank tightly. The new seat. Again, we're talking about a seat. It's just one. So it's a singular subject. So the verb is going to change according to the rules. And we have fit. Fit, we add an S. If we want to do the process of elimination, we look at the verb fit. We know that it's not a verb ending in S, CH, SH, X, or Z. So we cannot use rule number 2. Also, we cannot use rule number 3 because it's not a verb that ends in consonant and Y, so we have to go with rule number 1. So we just add an S. So then it changes to the new seat fits tightly, okay? And again, if you need to pause it and make any corrections, this is when you do it, okay? Let's continue. Now in the circle part, and some of you guys, you did copy the sentences, and others, you guys just said the answer. I am not 100%. I really can't remember if I said to follow the directions that it said in the extra page, in the extra practice page, or if I said just answers only. So it really, at this point, it really doesn't matter. What I want you to focus is informing the present tense correctly. So number 12, you're working with pay. So you should have Pat pays. The verb changes according to the rules because the subject is singular, okay? Pat pays the bill. He pays. Again, the verb changes because it's a singular subject and because it's not a verb that ends in S, right? Pay doesn't end with S, CH, SH, X, Z. We cannot follow rule number 3, rule number 2. It does not end with a consonant in Y because we know that A is a vowel, okay? And because we already know that, we know that we're going to follow rule number 1. We pay for lunch. Here the verb states in its base form because the subject is plural, okay? Number 13, toss. Now, toss is a verb that ends in S. So by now, when you see that, you're like, okay, I'm going to use rule number 2 because rule number 2 talks about verbs ending in S. Okay, so toss is a verb that ends in S. So let's see. We toss the ball. Here, the verb stays the same because the subject is plural. When you're talking about we, you're including yourself, but you're talking about many other people with you, right? If you're talking, let's say, for example, Leonardo and myself, or let's say that we are going to hang out. So we would say we, right? We are going to hang out. So we're talking about more than one person. So in this case, the verb stays the same because the subject is plural. Let's go to the next one. He tosses. Now here it has to change because the subject is singular. So we have to add that ES. And we know that we're following rule number 2. And I toss the salad. Let's not forget, and this was a tricky one, that I is an exception. Just like you is also an exception. So I and you are exceptions. So the verb stays the same. This is how you should have it, okay? Number 14, we're working with mix. We immediately identify the mix is a verb that ends in X, and we know that rule number 2 covers that. So we just got to keep an eye on the subject. So we have I mix the dough, and it stays in its base form because the subject is an exception, is I. And we know that we're going to treat it as if it was a plural subject. Here, she mixes the cards. Here we had to change the verb according to the rules, which is verbs ending in X, add ES, and that's what we did. We added an ES because the verb ended with X. And we're following rule number 2. And the verb changed because she is a singular subject, okay? Same thing here, Amy mixes. Again, we're just talking about a singular subject, just one person, so the verb has to change according to the rules. For number 15, wash, we identify that wash is a verb that ends with sh, and we know by now that rule number 2 is going to be applied here, right? So we just got to keep an eye on the subject. So you wash the car. Wash stays in its base form because you is an exception. Be careful with this one. So because you can get confused if you are not careful with this. I and you, they tend to be confusing because if you don't recall, you don't remember that these are exceptions, you're just going to see them as singular subjects, okay? So wash stays in its base form because you is an exception, and the verb stays in its base form. Next one, he washes. Here we do have to change the verb because the subject is singular, okay? And they wash, the verb stays in its base form because they is a plural subject. Am I going too fast? Good thing that you can pause and then play. Pause and play. Okay, 16. We have cry. So cry, we identify, oh, nope, we don't want that to go just yet. Give me a second. There we go, we're not done yet. Okay, so cry, we immediately notice that cry is a verb that ends in Y. And you see why, and you know that you have a rule that's going to talk about this. And if you don't remember the rule, but then you go back and you read it, and you're like, okay, verbs ending in consonant Y, so you have to make sure that the letter before it, which is this one here that I'm pointing to, letter R is before the Y, so we just need to be sure that this is a consonant, okay? And it is a consonant, so R is a consonant, so we use rule number 3, which says verbs ending in consonant and Y, we change the Y to I and add ES. So, the babies cry at night. Notice that the verb stayed in its base form because the subject is plural, okay? You cry out loud. Again, the verb stays in its base form because the subject is an exception, which is you, so the verb does not change. It stays in its base form. Next one, she cries for help. We look at the subject, and the subject is singular, so we know that the verb is going to change according to the rule. In the rule number 3, to be specific, again, I'm repeating myself, I know, it says verbs ending in consonant and Y, change the Y to I and add ES, okay? So this is what your paper should look like. Take a minute, pause it, double check your paper, make sure that if you need to correct anything that you do it at this time, okay? So that's all for today. I hope that this helped. I am so happy to be able to help you and give you the tools that you need to be able to work with what you guys have to do next. Before we go, I need for you to write CAH below the date, as we would CIC it. If we were in class, we would CIC it, correct it in class, but because you guys are at home, you're going to CAH, which is corrected at home, right below the date. Don't forget that anytime you do anything for Miss Villahermosa, you have to follow the format, the page, the title, the date. You guys know the drill. So write CAH below the date, and then you're going to write today's date. Again, just like we would do in class. The only difference is that we would CIC it, and I already mentioned that, okay? Also, now you guys are going to work on workbook pages 1, 2, and 3. I uploaded some workbook pages, and there are 3 pages. They're posted in the assignment section, okay? I want you to complete it either in your notebook or a loose leaf paper, and I want you to read the directions in each page, and you're going to do as it tells you to do, okay? Now, I need for you, because I just mentioned that there's a format that we would follow in class, the page number, you know that there's a square for it, the title, unit, lesson, and the date. We're going to follow the same format. The only difference is that you're going to title each workbook page this way, okay? So you're going to do page 1, present tense, and then you're going to work on page 1. Then when you get ready to start page 2, you're going to title it page 2, present tense, and then you get to work. Same thing for page number 3. Please remember to write the date as well. Same thing. We need to make sure that we follow pretty much the same format that we would if we were in the class. Okay, also before we go, starting next week on Wednesdays, we will meet. We will have a Zoom virtual class at 3 p.m. So I need for you to tell your parents and make all necessary arrangements for you to be present in that class, okay? Not only do I want to see you guys, but this is a good time for us to, if you guys have any questions, you can ask me right then and there. If you have questions about this, please email me, okay? Email me about anything. If you have any doubts, any questions, any concerns, just talk to me, okay? So, love you. Again, if you have any questions, you email me, and hope to speak to you guys soon.